Why? That was my battle cry as a kid, particularly when my parents told me to eat my vegetables. Why? It was also the word that I uttered on asking things like, why was the sky blue? Why did people wear neckties? And why did people hate each other so much in the Middle East? Questions just kept pouring forth from my over-curious and ADD-ish mind, and sometimes it was just too much for my parents. There was the time when I was 12 years old, and some gunmen had taken over the Iranian embassy in London. I wanted to know why, what was going on, and my parents couldn't answer me. So I travelled up to central London, despite their express instructions not to do so, and went to stand outside the embassy alongside the pro-Khomeini supporters, the Iranian dissidents, the English skinheads, the police, and went around asking them what they were doing there and why they were there. I got some answers, and I also got grounded for a week by my parents. Now, my curiosity turned from a habit to a profession. I became a journalist, and ultimately it led to me becoming a radio correspondent for the BBC, and I was dispatched in the 90s to Jerusalem. I arrived there just 3 weeks after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, and it was that point where the peace process was heading down this very deep trajectory into a void from which it hasn't really recovered. And I was there to report on what was going on all sides. So I would go and walk alongside, and walk in funeral marches as young men were carried to their graveyards in the West Bank. I would stand alongside the burnt-out carcasses of buses in Israeli streets. Now, it was terrible, but at the same time, for me as a journalist, it was a high, and in a way, it was fun. It was like a smorgasbord for the curious. It was sort of like an all-you-can-eat buffet with me as a witness watching other people eat. If I wanted to know why Hamas were carrying out a bombing campaign, I'd go to Gaza and I'd ask them. If I wanted to know what was going on between the Israeli army and Hezbollah, I'd hang out with the United Nations in the rocky hills of South Lebanon. It was, at that point, my dream job. Then there was a day in September 1997. I had some time to spare before an interview, and I was in central Jerusalem. And this happened to be the moment when Dunkin' Donuts had opened up in Israel. And alongside my appetite for news, I also had a sweet tooth, and so I thought this was just the moment to go and get some sugary Americana. So I wandered in and I ordered a Fruits of the Forest donut and a cup of coffee. Sat down, bit into the donut, had a sip of the coffee, another sip, and boom! Followed by another boom! I knew instinctively what it was. They were bombs. And before I knew it, I was in motion. My legs carried me out of that shop, and I looked up to my left, up this pedestrianised street from where I heard the sound of the explosions. And as I looked, I saw and I felt a third explosion, a ball of orange flame and black smoke, a third bomb. And I started running towards it. I needed to know what was going on and why. I ran up that hill. I remember 2 teenage girls running in the opposite direction, screaming hysterically. I remember there was an Israeli soldier standing with his arms out, trying to stop me, and I ran round him. And I got to the top of the street, and the first thing I saw was the body of the bomber. I knew it was the bomber by what happened to the body. And there were people all around, and there were already people tending to the injured. There were some police. Them I don't remember so clearly. But what sticks in my mind, there was this bank, and it had a green and white sign, and it was shattered. And it had this stone frontage, and I remember it looked like someone had thrown a bucket of red paint on the front of the bank. And of course, it wasn't red paint. It took me a few moments to gather myself. I spoke to some people, tried to work out what had gone on. 3 bombers, a number of dead, lots of injured. And I knew from past experience of having been at the sight of, in the wake of attacks, that I had to get onto a landline as soon as possible because the cell phone network would collapse under the weight of calls. So I went to a cafe and I explained who I was, and I asked to use their phone, and they said yes. And I got on the phone to London. At the same time, security forces came in and created a cordon. And I was inside the cordon, and I ducked behind the counter because I wanted to stay where I was on the line. And I got through to the news desk in London, and I began to be interviewed by TV and radio presenters on the other end of the line. Now, normally my BBC tones were very modulated and very calm and very well measured, but on this occasion, the words just came pouring out. My voice was shaking. I didn't know what I was saying. They were asking me what I saw, not reporting on what I'd heard from other people about what they'd seen. And there came the point where I went outside. I went for a break, and I stepped outside this cafe, and I saw an ultra-Orthodox guy, and he was part of the cleanup squad. And he started shouting at me, and I couldn't get what he was saying at first. And then I realized he was warning me to look where I was standing. Now, there are things that you remember, and there are things that you forget. And there are things that you would really rather you didn't remember. And it was one of those. Also, there was this fact weighing on me that had it not been for that stupid donut and that cup of coffee, cup of watery coffee, I would have been walking straight into the path of the bombers, just as they set off their bombs. Anyway, in the wake of that incident, I avoided public places and parked cars, go figure. But it didn't quell my appetite to find out what was going on and why, and rush towards trouble where it was happening. And I carried on in the months and years that followed as a reporter. But that incident stuck with me, along with the thought that Dunkin' Donuts saved my life. Thank you.